Good evening. Welcome to our World University Summit. And the forum questions that we're dealing with today is bringing the gender digital divide, bridging it, and improving participation of women in higher education and through higher education in the workshop as well. We have an international list of guests here who are experts in the field of education and also have knowledge in their field, which touches upon the use of technologies and digital technologies, which we've all been using in education. So I'm going to briefly introduce each of our guests, and then we're going to go through a brief introduction. Each of our guests will give a short introduction to their own take on the topic, and then we'll have it open for questions. So I'd like to begin with Dr. Vidya, who is the Pro-Vice Chancellor and Director of Symbiosis University, which is in India. She has a background in medicine, in the internationalization of higher education. She's been through 2 terms on the UGC, and she's been on the Central Advisory Board of the UGC. So thank you very much. I'm going to introduce our next speaker is Dr. Sandra Almeida, who is from the Universidad Federal de Minas Gerais. Is that right? You better correct me. And she is in Brazil. She has degrees from the same university in comparative literatures, as well as from University of North Carolina, and a PhD from Columbia in and comparative literature and literary studies. She is vice president of her university, and she also works with and does research in the hybrid teaching model and the way in which you can go beyond technology, going into innovative and new ways of approaching technology in education. So this will be an interesting talk. And then we have Dr. Raffaella Pugioni, who is from the Jindal School of International Affairs. She is a specialist in global human movements, the plight of migrants, of the undocumented, and human rights that require the protection of these migrants. Her research situates across 3 lines: the international migration of refugees, the resistance of migrants in the camps and holding centers, and then thirdly, political subjectivity. How are migrants going to explore the practices that are mandated by government requiring immobility? So I hope that if I did not get your identities correct, you can add to them when you have your chance to speak, okay? I'll just go through very briefly, keep being mindful of the time here, that, COVID has made us aware of something that was already happening. And this is the way technology, digital resources are being used, are being mined. COVID made us really jumpstart the way we use these technologies in education. And we use them, young people everywhere use social media, and they use IT for communication, both for instruction, social communication, instructions about health and well-being, became something that was really prevalent during the COVID period, and emergency information outreach, as well as providing people with the opportunity to continue their education in either hybrid or completely online models. Now, the question is, looking at equality, this is something that is covered quite extensively by the SDGs, and I'm bringing in the SDGs because of G20, that's one of their guiding principles, is the Sustainable Development Goals, as stated in the UN, the different UN documents, which are looking at ways to promote equality, equalizing the ways in which lives can be lived and enjoyed, and trying to break down that disparity amongst people in various parts of the world. One of the facts that we have is that women and girls are 25% less likely to use technology for basic purposes. Another fact is that they are also 13 times less likely to use computers for activities for learning and for work. And they are also not going to do much invention and exploration in getting patents that will use technologies. So these are areas that are quite important, and they're telling in who commands the field of technologies. What are some of the problems? Why has this situation been able to arise and continue and proliferate? There are biased gender norms, as we all know. There's stereotypes. The bias includes curriculums that really have the norms embedded in textbooks, in teaching and learning practices, and also choices that women are offered when they are choosing a career, when they're using a path to study. You know, STEM is something, the science, technology, engineering, and math, still only 35% of those going into those fields as a major field of study are women. It's even less for communication technology, with just 3% women going into those. And what I'm giving you are worldwide statistics. So it's going to differ quite a bit from country to country. One of the factors that's often repeated now is the Sustainable Development Goals. They were set, and there is a first assessment that's going to take place in 2030. Now, this assessment that will take place in the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals, it is estimated now it'll take 286 years. That's a long time to fully achieve the percentages that were set out to be, to be achieved. Now, what we know is whenever you have goals set out, they're kind of like a golden norm that's set up there, and it's a work in progress. And if wars, if extreme poverty, if environmental disasters don't stop the forward movement, we can still hope to have some things going forward. But one of the aspects that's underlined is countries have to really create legal norms that will stop violence against women. They will also have to stop harmful practices to women, and there will also be a real need to increase advantages of women of going into education that will lead them into developing technology. Why is this so important? Because the language of technologies is really very male-oriented. And I don't just mean the nouns and the verbs, but the whole idea, the conceptual framework, is very male-oriented. Once women get into the field, I think we can hope that we're going to see a change in it. And we're going to see systems that are more adapted to women. Another factor that's been cited by UN agencies, including UN Women, is recognizing the value of unpaid work. Women are constrained by an enormous amount of unpaid work. And also, there isn't a great sense of willingness on the part of many governments around the world to assure that women are going to have full participation in public life as lawmakers, as voters, as informed policymakers, so that in order to have access to equal resources, you need also to ensure equal access to food, healthcare, housing, and sanitation. Women empowerment is absolutely needed if we're going to design technologies that respond to the needs of women. So these are some of the ideas that have been put forward. They're the major ideas, in fact, put out by UN Women, UNICEF, and the United Nations. I'm sure that in your own lives, in your own countries, you may have more specific ways of dealing with this. And you and your own expertise may have ideas that either correspond and support or give us a completely different view of how we're going to achieve and look at this goal of having women be more active, be inserted into the workforce and into the use of digital technology. So I'm going to turn it over to you to discuss how this bridging of the gender divide, your ideas, can it be achieved, how it can be achieved, and some of the best practices that you have been able to encounter or that you've been able to imagine. So I will turn it over to Dr. Vidya. Would you be our first speaker, please? And I'm going to mute my mic right now.
Sure. Thank you, Kathleen, and thank you, O.P. Jindal and Dr. Raj for inviting me to speak on a topic that is very, very close to my heart. Of course, my expertise is more on internationalization of higher education, not so much on gender, but nevertheless, my passion is, of course, women empowerment. And through my expertise and experience, I just like to put in a few of my thoughts as well as a few of my experiments here at Symbiosis. Kathleen, you very rightly spoke about the gender divide and more importantly, the gender digital divide, which is the topic for discussion today. And I think it has become more prominent after COVID when I think each one of us as women had to get into digital transformation. It wasn't just about, operating your smartphones or your, being very active on social media because you were locked up in your homes. But I think it was more important for us as academia and more important for us as university leaders to ensure that, we had to teach our students, online, and this was a sudden change. And it was of course at the same time same for men and women on university campuses, but certainly we had to pay attention to this sudden crisis that happened in the March of 2020. If you look at the country, and the demography of India, where you have a young population, a very aspirational population, both men and women being very aspirational, there is still a rural and urban divide. So when we talk about a gender digital divide, it's not just between men and women, but it's also between urban and rural. And when you look at rural, again, the gender divide gets still more accentuated. And again, to quote a few examples, we have a school in about 300 kilometers here away in a small village from Pune. And this is a beautiful school that actually trains both boys and girls in the middle school and the high school. And, there we realized that during the pandemic, when somehow teachers got together to teach online, the smartphones were only given to the boys and not to the girls. And therefore, whereas the boys could get educated, of course, not a very pleasant way of educating school kids, on smartphones, but nevertheless, they could access education, but girls could not. And, when we spoke to the parents, if there was one phone in the family, then it was obviously given to the boy and not to the girl. And therefore, I think there is this huge accentuated gender digital divide that started right, in the house during the pandemic, got accentuated more in rural India than urban India, because in urban India, obviously, everybody had access to, to smartphones at that point in time. If you look at the statistics, the recent iShare report, which is the All India Survey for Higher Education, shows that out of the almost 9.5 million students, in the STEM disciplines, just about 43% who were women, and hardly 14% who, became scientists or technologists and so on. And therefore, there again, you see a divide. You also see this divide at, not just the master's level, but more importantly, and again, accentuated at the PhD or the doctoral level, where, you have less number of women or girls passing out of the PhD program than boys and then men. What we did here, and I always believe that, instead of blaming the government for not doing certain things, of course, in India, you do see a lot of programs that help girls, both urban and rural, help them not just study in good institutions, but also, get encouraged for empowerment. And there are a lot of women empowerment focus here in India. But nevertheless, I think as universities, we have a very important role to play. And just to again quote a few examples of what we have done here is that, our whole university campus, a large university campus, is in a rural area close to the city of Pune. And we've adopted 22 villages. What we've done there is, because we realized that this kind of issue getting, focused during the pandemic. So post-pandemic, what we did was we set up digital mobile vans, because we knew that, these girls could not come to the schools or to the university campuses, even if when we started some skill development programs in IT. So we sent out these digital mobile vans, and we had, in one van, we had about 12 laptops. Our computer science faculty and our computer science MTech students actually operated this program, and they went into these small villages around the university campus. And the focus was on training or giving technology skills to women or to young girls. And that became so popular that it wasn't just girls, but it was old men and women who wanted the program. There were young children, school-going children who wanted to access this program. And, now we've kind of, from one van, now that we have about 3 vans that go into these villages. So we thought that this was one good way to actually instill, technology or infuse technology learning, for women, across these villages. The second that we did was, and we've been doing this for many years, was, giving scholarships to girls from poor families from these villages, because we just felt that maybe one girl who's educated here will educate many more. And the mandate was that if you get educated and you get employed, then you should fund another girl, or at least part fund another girl for education. This program has been going on for a long time. And again, the focus is STEM. We've also included medicine, which is nursing, medical technology, such programs also in the scholarship program. And this is again doing very well. We identify girls from poor families and ensure that they go through some STEM program, a degree program at undergraduate level. And then, of course, they get jobs through campus placements. We support them with, giving laptops. We also support them with English communication and English language training. And of course, the technology skills through the bachelor's in computer applications or a BTech in computer science or any of the STEM disciplines that they would want to study. And, our over the last 8 years, we've been doing this with phenomenal success. And we see that, there has been a huge transformation of those families being benefited because one girl gets educated and obviously the family gets empowered. The third thing is that our focus on women entrepreneurs. And here again, technology-driven entrepreneurship programs. So we have an incubator on campus which is funded by the Government of India, the Department of Science and Technology. And we have a wing which is called as a Women Entrepreneurship Wing. Again, in these 22 villages, our students work with these self-help groups or with even individual women, look at what kind of startups or what kind of small businesses they want to start, and again give them training in technology, because we know that it is technology that is going to help them grow their businesses. Again, this program is we've tied up, collaborated with Niti Aayog, and it's been very successful over the last almost 6 years. And definitely we see a lot of women empowerment through the Women Empowerment Wing. So much so that Deakin University, Australia has collaborated with us for a research program on women entrepreneurship. So a couple of such examples, I can go on quoting many more, but I feel that when of course, there is a digital divide, there is a gender digital divide, but I think instead of just sitting and blaming, talking about it, I think it is for each one of us as individuals and each one of the universities. We have 1,000 universities in India. Even if 50% of them really take this up as their responsibility and kind of train and mitigate this digital gender divide, at least in the neighborhood of those universities, I think this will be a great example that others can emulate. So I think, Kathleen, I'll stop here because I don't know what the time is. Maybe I've covered my 5 minutes, but I will be happy to take more questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And you've brought up some of the questions that I'm sure we'll have a chance to discuss later on. And I'm sure our participants, the people who are watching at a distance, will have questions about it. So Dr. Vidya, thank you very much. And I think we're going to move on to Professor Dr. Sandra Almeida. And would you like to address the public?
Thank you very much, Professor Kathleen Modrowski. I would like to thank Jindal Global University for the invitation. For me, it's a pleasure to be here today. Good evening to everybody. Good morning here in Brazil. So as you pointed out, I'm the president of one of the largest universities in Brazil. One of the few women in this position as well. So I'm very happy to talk about, to be here in this global event, which is wonderful to be able to talk to you in India. I was the coordinator of the Center for Indian Studies here at my university. And for me, it's really a pleasure to be here and also to talk about something that is my field of study. I think it has to do with my position as president of this university, this large university, but it's also my field of research as a professor. I am a professor of literature, of comparative literature, and I work specifically with women, contemporary literature by women writers, and also with feminist literary studies. So I'm particularly fond of this subject, and I also make this as my duty as a president, to work towards bridging the gap between the genders. And here, our topic for today, which is gender digital divide, I consider it as one of the many divides that we have when we talk about the presence of women, at the universities or in the workforce as well. I like to say that we've come a long way. I am the third woman president in my university, which is a rarity. Most of the universities in the country have not had a woman president yet, but I'm the third one. So I think that we can say that we've come a long way, but we still have a lot of ground to cover when you're talking about the gender divide, not only in Brazil. I see the situation is very similar in India. The data show us that it's a worldwide phenomena. UNESCO, the fact that UNESCO has established, as you pointed out very well, as one of the goals of the 2030 agenda, gender equality, shows how urgent the matter is. what I like to say, and I usually say when I'm asked to talk about it, is that the fact that we, in some ways, are in this position, we serve as an example to other women, and that working towards equality between the genders is an aim that we should all embrace, all men and women, because it's good for our society, it's good for the country, it's good for the economy, it's good for us to be able to live better as society. So when you talk about gender, digital divide, we include also all the divides that we have when you talk about gender. Of course, the gender digital divide always existed, but it became more blatant during the pandemic because we did have to switch towards the digital. And we realized that not only we did not have access to the majority of the population, but the women were, in fact, they had less access than men did. So it is a question that has to do with social economic situation, but it also applies to gender. We have to have that in mind. Brazil is a very unequal society. We have the rich is very rich, the poor is very poor. So we have as an aim as university to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor. And when we talk about the rich and the poor, we have to be aware also that we women are not in the same situation. That's what I like to call the distance between us, which is the name of a novel that I love, a very interesting novel that talk about the difference between the many women. So when we talk about women, we have to be aware that if we who are in the university, we have more access to technology, to the STEM disciplines. A lot of the women, they do not. Even if they come from middle class, they sometimes don't have access. And if they come from the poor class, we have to forget it. There is no access whatsoever. And when we consider the indigenous people, for example, who are very in the interior of the country, this is completely non-existent. So the situation is really very unstable in terms of the access to digital devices and access to education as well. And I would like to pinpoint something that is also important for us to consider, is that when we talk about gender and sexual difference, we're talking about stereotypes, as you pointed out, but we're also talking about attitudes, the attitudes. And where do I want to get? I want to get to the point that we have a responsibility. And here we have a responsibility as universities, as leaders of universities, and as teachers as well. In the same way that I believe that the government has a strong responsibility as well. We just got out from we had a very right-wing government that did a lot of harm to women in this country. And really, instead of improving our condition in terms of gender equality, it showed us that we had a major drawback. So it is the role of the government, because the government is responsible for not only set up the public legislation or the public policies regarding gender equality, but also because it has to give us the support so that we can implement the laws and regulations in our universities as well. So it is our responsibility, but we have to say in a country like Brazil, if we do not have regulations, if you do not have policies that support what we want to implement in our universities, we are not going to be able to succeed. I would also like to call attention to something that is very dear to me. I come from the humanities, and I make a point of whenever we're talking about STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, we have to add an H in between, STEM with an H, STEM. Humanities is central to help us bridge the gap between this digital divide. Why? Because we can only attain that through education, and we have and to construct citizens that are educated and that think about gender equality, we need to include the humanities in the STEM, traditional STEM discipline and courses. So this is something that we are doing. I would like to finish with an example from my university, is that we have a couple of disciplines that we offer to all the students here, whether they come to the humanities, the technology, or whatever. Human rights, gender equality, and several environmental issues. So we make a point of teaching the students also the importance of respecting women, the importance of opening up the courses to the inclusion of women, so that we have a campaign at the moment to try to include more women in the STEM. That's where we have the most imbalance between men and women in our universities and in the country as well. I like to give an example. 55% of our students are women, but if you go to the STEM, the traditional STEM areas, you have only 12% of women. And what is interesting for us to see is that the more women move into their career as researchers, for example, their presence diminishes, especially if you're talking about the STEM area. So the more they go, if we have like postgraduate, we have fewer students, professor, we have a smaller number of students. And if you're talking about those in positions that I have, we have few women as well. So concluding, I would like to say that it's a major issue when we're talking about the digital divide, but we have to think that as one of the divides that we have when you're talking about gender. When we address the digital divide, we also address several other issues that are implied in this terrible situation that we see in the case of women all over the world. I know that it's more acute in countries like Brazil, but we can see that all over the world as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And for our final speaker, before we open this up to questions and debates among ourselves, Professor Rafaela, would you like to speak, please?
Okay. Hi, everyone, and thank you again for inviting me. Actually, I'm talking from Italy because I've been doing now research for the past 2 years in Italy. Now, I just take for granted that we live in an unequal society. So the way I would like to contribute to this debate is asking one simple question: what can we do as an academic? And in trying to answer this question, I would like to bring also my experience as an academic in 2 ways. First, yes, I've been researching on migration for the past 20 years. And when we talk of migrant, or especially undocumented migrant and refugees, the very key point that we look at is question of agency, question of empowerment. We look at the language, how they are discriminated. So in that sense, there is a lot of commonality between looking at migrant and looking at women. Also, I would like to highlight my experience in terms of teaching gender issue at university. I spent 5 years in India, 2 years in Azerbaijan, and now also a very short period of time, 2 years in India. And in all the 3 universities, I've been teaching gender issue in international relations. And what I notice here is that even the definition of gender is problematic. So in a sense, if we ask ourselves how we can contribute, my first answer will be, first, we need to change even the language that we use. The language that we use with migrant is already a negative language, but also when we look at gender, we tend to think in terms of women. So every time there are courses on gender issue, what you have is an audience which is mostly women. With the idea that if we talk of gender, if we talk of women, then the problem is connected with them. It is their audience that should be there. So in that sense, when we ask what can we change, is first answer I will say we need to change our mindset, even the language that we use. So rather than thinking, for instance, in terms of gender issue, thinking in terms of inclusiveness. So teaching courses of more on equality and inclusiveness, in where we actually put everyone together. So it's not simply women, but also people from different, we include question of ethnicity, question of race, question of discrimination. Because then we attract everyone and we demonstrate that the problem is not simply gender or women. We are all involved in this process. We need to change the mind of women in terms of greater participation, but we also need to change the mind of men. But we need also to change the mind of parents. And I'm saying this because I remember when I was in China, most of our female students were studying international politics, knowing that afterwards, as soon as they finish studying, actually they were going to get married. So in that sense, they were simply collecting the piece of paper, and they were not likely to use the piece of paper in terms of work. So when we say that we need to educate people, we need to educate everyone. Also use students to educate their parents. And in that sense, IT resources can be a plus, because what we have learned from COVID time, despite again the difference in terms of access to IT, what we have learned is that it is possible to learn from the distance. So in that sense, we can use IT facilities also to stimulate adult women, mothers, who have not received education, and then to have access to that. So in that sense, as an academic, we can stimulate in our university how we can, for instance, attract adult women that have not had the chance of doing that. They do not have the chance, for instance, to attend university. So in that sense, use technology. Of course, we also need to provide them the facility. But if we are looking at, again, how technology nowadays can help us, then we need really to look at how technology can help us, because it breaks the barriers in terms of distance and give a lot of flexibility. So, and this is, I think, what we have learned in terms of opportunity of learning from COVID. And of course, now we need to understand what is the best way then now to abolish those barriers and how to provide facilities. So in that sense, my, let's say, 5 minutes presentation was looking at language first, because again, language itself, when, again, I teach question of migration, but also when we talk of gender, is limiting. So we need to really start also thinking of ourselves, how to use a more inclusive language without distinguish, and making students themselves understand that there are not some sectors just for men, there are not some courses only for women. And secondly, so when we talk of, again, of empowerment, and the question of empowerment, again, when I do look at migrant is the same instrument that we should also use the same mentality when we're looking at women. And the first question of empowerment is education. So in that sense, let's use IT facility in order to try to be as inclusive as possible. Because again, with IT, women can also finally approach university at any stage. So in that sense, I guess that in 10, 20 years time, there could be major difference, because in that sense, we are not simply targeting the student, we are targeting a much broader audience. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And I do have a couple of questions from the audience, but I would like to bring up one question that I think comes out from everyone here. One is the question of government, and we ourselves as educators are part of a certain culture. So how can we bridge and make education transformative? Whether it's, based on women empowerment, but inclusiveness. How can we change a culture? Which goes in certainly very, very deep lines. It's reflected, I feel, often in our own attitudes as women. It's going to be reflected in communities, and whether or not the government has very good laws, it's also reflected in many government decisions. You know, who's going to get maximal support? How are we going to be transformative without offending the norms and morality of a country? So I'm opening this up to you. Is transformation possible at a very deep level in society? Anyone want to go into that?
Yeah, can I?
Please.
So I think, Kathleen, it's about the culture that, you create as families and a culture that you create as societies, So, unless you really create a culture in your own family of inclusivity, I think that's very critical. How do you treat your son and your daughter? Or how have your parents treated you and your brother? So it all reflects right from there. So when a child is growing, these are, at least in India, we call it sanskars. So, what kind of sanskars or what kind of culture that you have been brought in. And I think here the role of parents and families is very, very important. This is one. Second is, again, transformation through cultures being brought in societies. And when I say societies, it's not just communities or, cities or villages, but it's also about the society that you live in, maybe a university campus where you can actually look at inclusivity. Another example that I would like to quote is when you talk about inclusivity, it need not even limit itself to the country that you live in, but also, facilities that you create for, for people from other countries. For example, as much as we have scholarships for Indian students, Indian girl students, we have equal number of scholarships for African girl students. And you can't imagine, the kind of backgrounds that they come from, still underdeveloped than what we have in India. And transformation of such African girls, when they go back homes to their countries, and when they write back to us about the kind of transformations that they have done in their families and the communities that they live in, it's just, it's just something so soul satisfying. Similarly, we had about 25 Afghanistan girls. Of course, they no longer come in with the change in regime there. But for several years, we used to have about 25 girls coming from rural villages from Afghanistan, and typically for computer science education. And when they went back, you would see many Afghan boys going to the US and Canada, but the girls would go back to their country to empower more women in their villages, more women in their country. So I think this is kind of a culture that you create of inclusivity. And I think it's upon each one of us as individuals, each one of us as families, and then, of course, the organizations that we work in.
If I may, can I?
Yeah, who would like to speak next? I see that.
I would like to.
Okay, Sandra.
I would like to refer to an educator, a Brazilian educator who is well known. I don't know whether you've heard of him, Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire has said something that I think it's very important and very relevant. We cannot transform society. We transform people who in turn are going to change society. It's one of his major arguments. So we cannot aim to change society as a whole. We have to start small. So I think I agree with Dr. Vidya mentioned, we have to start, and Dr. Rafaela Pijonita mentioned that as well. We as educators, we have a role. We are dealing with people. So I usually tell my students, if you come out of my class, which is on literature and women, if you come into my class and you get out as being better readers and better citizens, I am satisfied with the work that I did. So we have a major role in teaching people how to be respectful toward gender divides or to the other people who are excluded from society. I would like to make a reference also to a very important novelist you probably have heard of her, Chimamanda Adichie. She has two very small books which are very important. One of them, and the title tells a lot about our responsibilities as educators and as also presidents of universities in my case. She says one of the small book is called we should all be feminists. So it's a very short book. And the other one is to raise feminist children. So here she points out to the fact that it's a work that we have to do as a collective, you know, as society. You have all to be in that frame of mind. Rafaela talked a little bit about it, and I agree. Something else that I would like to add is that, but the government has a very important role, because we only teach a limited number of people who have access to universities. In my country, it's like that. The majority of the young population, they don't even have access to the university. So our action is limited. It's up to the government to set up rules, public policies that really are responsible for, become responsible for helping us with bridging this gender divide. So I'm talking about violence against women, access to education, equal salary. So there are a lot of things that we depend on the government to set up the rules so that we can make our role as educators that we are.
Thank you very much. And Rafaela, would you like to add
Yes,
to
sure.
the discussion?
Now, when we talk of transformation of society, I think we need to start from the premise that we need to inspire students, first of all. So it's not simply teaching them question of equality, but really inspiring to imagine a different society. And the reason I'm saying this, also when I point out the question of language, I point out the question of language because what I notice that in everyday life, when we talk of, for instance, being a feminist, there is a negative connotation of that. That's why I was suggesting that we need to find other language which is much more inclusive. And the point why I say inspiring is because, for instance, when I was in Azerbaijan, in Baku, I was teaching gender, and one of the students there was actually from a male student from Afghanistan. And at some point, actually, he came to my office hour and he explained me the reason of participating in their class, because he actually was not at all interested in gender. But he was inspired by my teaching. So in that sense, if we are saying that we are going to transform society, yes, universities, they are not as powerful as the government, but at the same time, we have the power to still change society, especially if we are using, and if we introduce higher technology. So IT technology, the fact that we are able to distribute message, classes, lesson online, where women, men, people that are normally discriminated, people that come from minority group of poor classes are able to look at them. Because again, the question is not simply to inspire and teach to students, but also their parents. Because again, in many cases, we still parents that decide what exactly students are going to study. It is parents who decide, for instance, whether women, even within rich family, wealthy family, that women actually are going to study, but then afterward, they expect women to go home and become a mother and a wife. So I guess the key question also is not simply about education, but how also can we use the power of IT in order to educate a bigger number of people. But at the same time, it's not, education should also mean inspiration, how to even really teach them how to move beyond the way in which we look at society now. So the transformative element needs to be somehow also connected with an imagining new way of looking at society. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for the really useful examples, which all are a little bit different, take a different perspective, and we'll round those up in a minute. But I also have another question for you. And this is an audience question. It is about poverty. How do we deal with poverty when you have, and someone brought up the question of, who has the right to use digital technology? What is this investment, even in something like a cell phone? Who gets the right to use the cell phone? I know in certain sections of the United States, as well as in India, the girl child's education, and some of you alluded to this, is not considered a good investment. So it's, to the family. And you mentioned the need to inspire the student, the need to inspire parents as well. But what else do you think would be needed to make people realize that this is a good investment, when one of the questions that was brought up, one of the problems brought up was the cost and the value of unpaid labor, and the way unpaid labor in every single country, which is women's labor, is being used and exploited. So do we bring in the government? Do we create incentives for having girls go to school longer and study technology? And I take that point that Sandra made, that humanities is also a very important facet of education as well. But how can you incentivize people to see the value of women in education, and then having women know, understand, and create models of digital learning? Anyone want to go for that one? Yes, please.
Yes, I just would like to comment on something that you pointed out about the poverty. Poverty is feminine. We've learned here in this country, there is an expression that we use, the feminization of poverty. There are a lot of women or single mothers that don't have access to digital devices. They don't have access to education either. And they're also tied to something else that we have called the ethics of care, as you pointed out, unpaid labor, they're the ones who take care of the family. And this was very clear during the pandemic. So one of the things that we can do as educators, that we have to do, is to allow them more access to education and to the university, not only the courses that we teach here, but extramural activities, working with the communities, and we try to do that a lot. And also, once they have access to the university, we need to give them support. So here in Brazil, we talk a lot about the fact that they have to give them access to the universities. And once they are in the university, we have to give them support. So we're talking not only about financial support, but we're also talking about psychological support with their children. We do have a care center here at the university to help mothers bring their children so that we can change the situation. I think this is a way to try to diminish a little bit the gap. The gap is huge, but I think actions like that we do at the university, they do have some impact in the lives of these women.
So can I come in, Kathleen? Yeah, so I would like to bring in another perspective. I liked what Sandra said, that yes, of course, the role of universities is important, and giving access to education and creating an ecosystem is far more important. It's not just about giving access and saying, I've given you admission, now come and study here. But, to make it viable for that woman or for that girl to study in a university, or a woman to be employed in a university, is very critical. The second is what we see in India is, again, what the companies or the corporate sector is doing. So there is something called as the CSR fund, the corporate social responsibility, which the companies or the large corporates have to spend on, and many of them have using this fund for educating women, and especially educating women in computer science and technology. So a lot of skill-based programs may not be degree programs that people can afford, or and really spend time on, whether it's 3 years or 2 years. But certainly, some kind of skill development programs where these women can be skilled in various skills, both digital and non-digital skills, and then, empowering them with, with mentorship and so on. So I think that's something that we have seen recently in India, and a large number of companies are supporting women in education, women in skill development.
I would just
Yeah, please add your ideas.
just add one point. Because I remember, for instance, when I was studying, after I finished my BA, I was in the UK, and for instance, did not have access to email at home. So what I used to do was to go to the public library. And I remember there were a lot of facilities. So in that sense, I think that university should work more closely together with local municipality. So for instance, in that sense, local libraries, where again, from early stage, so children can borrow also books, videos. So in that sense, you have both access to particular knowledge, particular videos, but at the same time, they will be free. Because again, if we are talking of poverty, so in that sense, because the problem with university, like in some countries, university are very expensive. In other countries, for instance, where I come from, BA are actually very cheap in Italy. And even you can go to university without registering, like an observer. No one is going, the doors are open. But of course, in other countries, now mass majority like British system, American system, again, university is very expensive. But if there is the question of poverty, my first instinct will be, let's develop really big libraries and use, because also library have IT facilities, so digital technology. So in that sense, we are not simply focusing on students, but we are focused on all the steps from early child up to the parents, mother as well. That could be one practical way of doing that, rather than simply think of university and how to reach university or how to give scholarship, because that will still be limited.
Can I, Kathleen, just to
Sure,
add,
go ahead.
just a recent example. So, we had the ministry. So it's not that government is not doing, in fact, government is doing a lot on women empowerment, women skilling, specific programs. One such program that we undertook at our university was through the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. And what they did, they had about a group of young women, I would say young girls and women gathered, and they just taught these girls, how to make videos and how to use social media. And after the 2 days of workshop, I went and interacted with these girls, and these girls were typically from the neighborhood villages, the 22 villages that we've adopted. And I just asked them that, now what will you do? You've learned to make videos and you've learned to use Insta and, other social media. So what will you do? And, almost all of them said that, we feel so empowered that maybe we could start small businesses and we could use the social media, to use as a tool to grow our businesses. Whereas many of them didn't even have ideas of what kind of business they would want to do. But just that one technology skill that was imparted over 2 days made them feel so empowered that, these are little things that, anybody can do, even at an individual level or, at a level of an organization. So I just felt, and I like the idea of Rafaela, to say that, there could be public spaces, where, which need not really have, any kind of fees to be paid or, something that is very expensive, but maybe, public places like public libraries and all, that could be an initiative by the local municipality here, to create a library setup where people can just go in and visit and learn technology by themselves.
If I can add, because precisely the question also to provide information. So when we talk of empowering and inspiring, in that sense, we need to offer somehow what are the possibilities. And this is what is missing So once they know, okay, this is possible, or this information is possible, this education is possible, even if it's going to take long or just once a week, then also ideas will come to them. The problem is if they are completely left out from here, they do not even know how to use their ability. Thank you.
Okay, our time is almost up. We have some very good ideas that have come out of this. Certainly, we've gone from, in these examples, from the power of individuals, using the words and the example of Paulo Freire, that it's going to be this kind of transformation comes from the community, comes from individuals. And this is something that can really work. We work at different levels. Another level that was being talked about, and I certainly have seen it in many countries in Europe. I have not seen it, maybe you can probably correct me, but the use of public spaces, like the library, being a place that's an open space for everyone, learning space without the constraint, without people being made to pay for that space. And, Video, you brought up something very important, which was the idea of CSR investment in education that's targeted oftentimes to a region, to a special group, but also can be quite powerful. So I'm getting the sign that we have to close off here because other people are waiting to come in. I just want to add, we've got a question here that seems to be important to the person who asked, and what is the role of cyberbullying that will discourage people from using digital means and getting involved? Any idea there?
I really don't have an idea. If I can just come in, I really don't have an idea. But yes, this is something that has been kind of discussed. But I think let's keep away all the negatives of, use of technology. I think we should look at the positive side of what it can really do well for an individual, especially for a girl who needs to be empowered, who needs to be included in the use of technology, who needs to be included in getting herself educated, because we in India believe that, one girl being educated, it's like a whole family being transformed. And, I think let's look at that and really look at, all the negatives of technology.
Okay, anyone have, and I'm being told that we're really getting close to the edge. Anyone have one word you want to close off with? One idea.
I think I would like to end with a hopeful tone. I think it's hope for a better future. If you think about a better future, you're talking about including women in society as a right.
Do you have a last thought for us now, Rafaela?
As I said, I'm always positive. So in that sense, we need to, in order to inspire the others, we need to inspire ourselves. But the idea of inspiration, new way of looking at education and how to involve people have to be positive. So in that sense, also, when we look at technology, let's look at the positive element that we can use from technology.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. I wish we had an extra hour, but we don't. So let's hope that we can meet again in the near future. Thank you all for your participation and your varied points of view. Thank you.
Thank you to you.
Thank you very much.